had forgotten left his mic open and did what most people do in the back and whistled victory in Jesus the whole time it was all broadcast through the thing. So I said at least I wasn't doing that. So we good to go? Okay. I want to welcome everybody who's watching at home. Thank you for doing that, whether you're doing it now live or whether you're doing it sometime later in the day or the week. Keep sharing that video. Hundreds and hundreds of people are connecting this way. It's a great outreach, and thank you for being here. So, my wife has a theory that seems to hold a great deal of water when you put it to the test. And her theory is that before you're born, God comes to you and says, do you want more intelligence or common sense? When you go to Earth, which one do you want more of? Now, you can have some of both, but you can't be apparently really smart and have a whole lot of common sense. You can't get both those in large amounts. And my parents are a great example of that theory. My mom was a smart woman, don't misunderstand, she really was a smart woman, but she had a lot of just good old, plain old common sense. My dad, on the other hand, was frighteningly smart, a brilliant man, often lacked an ounce of common sense. One day, my dad, my mom, Joanne, and I are sitting around the kitchen counter at my house, our house, the house that my parents lived in that day. We weren't married yet, I don't think, or we were visiting, one of the two. And my mom was canning, and it was a small batch of something. What? Slaw. Slaw. Okay, thank you. And she had one of these good old-fashioned mixing bowls. You know, they're not that big, they're not huge. It's a good-sized mixing bowl, but it's a mixing bowl. It's not a 50-gallon drum. And she wanted to know, she wanted to know how many pint jars we thought she needed to prep in order to can the slaw that was in that bowl. Well, the two of us looked and we went, what do you think? 6, maybe 8? Like, yeah. Meanwhile, my dad grabs a yellow legal pad, a pencil, and a slide rule. I'm not kidding, not a ruler, not a calculator, but a slide rule. My dad was an engineer, and he starts crunching numbers. He's measuring the bowl, and he's writing stuff down, and he's sliding that slide rule all over the place. And when he had finished all his, what we like to call calculations, he slams the pencil down as if he's finished, his law review test. And he confidently announces to the world, 56 pints. 56 pints? Dad, look at the bowl. Look at the bowl. There's no way. He insisted. He looked back over his numbers. He said, I crunched the numbers. The slide rule does not lie. Well, you might imagine my mom did not prep 56 pint jars that day. So today we wrap up our current sermon series to 5 sacrifices based on the list found in the Old Testament book of Leviticus. And it includes a powerful connection between us and God. And these offerings of the law are seen as a pattern for our approach to God. If you remember, 4 weeks ago, we started with the very first sacrifice, the burnt sacrifice. And it was the first step toward loving God more perfectly. 3 weeks ago, we moved on to the meal sacrifice, which was not a meal the way we think of it, but grain offering that focused on a life dedicated to generosity and giving. 2 weeks ago, we considered the peace offering, focusing on praise and thanksgiving. Last week, we moved into the sin offering, looking at our unintentional weakness and failures before God. And today, we wrap the whole thing up as we come full circle with the trespass offering, the trespass sacrifice, and we focus on more intentional sin. And today's scripture is found in the 5th chapter of the book of Leviticus. Hear these words.
If anyone sins because they do not speak up when they hear a public charge to testify regarding something that they have seen or learned about, they will be held responsible. If anyone becomes aware that they are guilty, they must confess in what way they have sinned. As a penalty for the sin they have committed, they must bring to the Lord a female lamb or goat from the flock as a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for them for their sin, and they will be forgiven.
Okay, so now we have all five sacrifices. Remember, the first three were voluntary because they were seen as a sweet aroma lifted up to God. You were encouraged, but it was voluntary. Lift that up before God. The last two were mandatory. Mandatory because they were seen as an atonement, a forgiveness for sin. Now, the difference between last week's sin offering and this week's trespass offering is the focus on intentional sin. Last week was unintentional. Today focuses on an intentional sin. And did you notice, the portion that Joanne read started right out with the concept that if you know something, if you've seen or heard something, you have a responsibility to speak up about it, to act upon it. If you don't, it says God will hold you accountable. If you know something and you don't speak up about it or act upon it, it says God will hold you accountable. In fact, the strict Levitical laws of the Old Testament describe that behavior as sin. Sin that requires atonement. And the way we would atone things back then, the way you set things right in this particular sacrifice, was to bring a female, did you notice that, lamb or goat from the flock as an atonement of sin. Female, lamb or goat. Now it's interesting that this is the only one of the 5 sacrifices that focuses on female animals. And I really couldn't find anything that explained that. Why? But as I read back over Leviticus 5 and I kind of unpacked the words, this Latin term from seminary, seminary was a long time ago, but this Latin term jumped out at me. And the term is Hagiae Sophia. Hagiae Sophia. And it literally means the wisdom of God. In the Old Testament Orthodox understanding of God, his wisdom was seen as his more feminine side. And you are welcome to insert your joke right there, and you'll probably be a little more accurate than us guys would be comfortable with. But, God is bigger than a gender, right? The Bible describes him usually as him. The Bible is very patristic and shows God as a man. But God is bigger than a gender, and God has all aspects in him. But the Old Testament Orthodox understanding was Hagiae Sophia, the wisdom of God, and it was seen as a feminine trait. So one thing I carry away from this 5th sacrifice is this: Hagiae Sophia. When you exercise Hagiai Sophia, God's wisdom, you're responsible for what you hear and what you see. Now, when we came here, this is our 7th year that we are in now, hard to believe. But when we came here, one thing that was impressed upon us, and I've shared this before, shouldn't be a huge revelation, but one thing that was impressed upon me when we came here from the United Methodist folks farther up the food chain than me, was that this was a congregation that had great potential for growth, but that was so landlocked in the building that the only way this church was going to grow was to convince you all to build a new building. So while that was not quite a mandate when we came, that was highly suggested to me by higher-ups in our conference when we came here. But then we got here, and we quickly saw 2 things. We saw that this congregation had been a pillar and a beacon in this community for over 100 years. That this congregation is an integral part of the heart of this community right where it sits. We saw that immediately. We also saw that you all had wisely invested a lot of money in this building over the last 12 years, starting from now, back 12 years-ish, and making this building more secure, making this building more usable. I mean, you think about it, in the last 12 years, from the nuts and bolts things like tuck pointing and weatherproofing and roofing, which aren't exciting in the least and don't really change the aesthetic of anything at all, but they make the building watertight and secure, which is huge. You all did all that. You went through that amazing elevator campaign, which people still marvel that you all did that, and you look at that amazing elevator and you look at the huge impact it has had on this congregation. And you come all the way through that to the campaign we're currently in, upgrading bathrooms and air conditioners and windows and choir lofts. This church has been committed to being here and making this place work, and committed to growth in the midst of it. I don't think you all realize how unique and special that makes you. We've been around the block a time or two, and the fact that you all have been so committed to making this facility work, and yet still committed to wanting to grow, makes you incredibly unique. So with all that in mind, I would like to invite Scott Spencer as our Administrative Council Chairperson and other members of the team that Scott represents, if they would come up at this time. Scott has some information that he would like to share with you. And Scott, Joanne has the mic that you will want.